You think you know the story of your life, until a dusty box in an attic whispers a truth that changes everything. It's a truth I stumbled upon, one that rewrote my entire past and finally pointed me toward my future. And it all started with a simple brass key, a key my father clutched in his hand the day he died. He never told me what it opened. For 20 years, it was just a cold, metallic question mark hanging from a nail in my workshop. A mystery I'd given up on solving. But then my granddaughter asked about her great-grandfather. And that simple question sent me on a journey back to a place I thought I'd forgotten, and to a love story that was never meant to be mine. If you've ever wondered about the secrets your own family might be keeping, then perhaps my story will mean something to you. I hope you'll stay with me, because some truths are too important to stay buried. My father, Arthur, was a man of few words and deep silences. He ran a small hardware store in a town so small it barely earned a dot on the map. Crestwood, the kind of place where everyone knew your business, or thought they did. He was a good man, a kind man, but there was always a shadow behind his eyes, a quiet sorrow he carried like a worn leather jacket. He'd come home from work, smell of sawdust and oil, and he'd sit on the porch swing, staring out at the maple tree he'd planted the day I was born. He'd just swing and think. I'd bring him a glass of iced tea, and he'd pat my hand, but his mind was miles away, decades away. I asked my mother about it once, when I was about 16. She just sighed, a sound full of dust and old hurts, and said, "Your father has a chapter in his life he keeps closed, son. Some doors are better left shut." And so, we never opened them. We just lived in the quiet house that surrounded his silence. The day he passed, it was a gentle autumn morning. The leaves on that maple were a blaze of fire. I was there, holding his hand. His breathing was shallow, a faint whisper. And then, his eyes, clouded with age and medication, focused on me with a sudden, startling clarity. He squeezed my hand with a strength I didn't know he had left. He didn't say my name. He didn't say he loved me, though I never doubted that he did. He pressed something cold and hard into my palm. His voice was a dry leaf scratching against stone. "For Eleanor." Then, the light left his eyes, and I was left holding a tarnished brass key and a name I had never heard before. Eleanor. Who was Eleanor? It wasn't my mother's name. It wasn't any aunt or cousin I knew. It was a ghost, a whisper from a life before me. For 20 years, that key was a quiet torment. I tried it in every old lock I could find. The store's back door, a forgotten trunk in the attic, even an old safety deposit box at the bank his business used. Nothing. It was a key to a lock that seemed to no longer exist. My wife, Sarah, God rest her soul, would say, "Oh, Henry, let it be. It was just the rambling of a dying man." But it didn't feel like rambling. That moment of clarity, it felt like the most important message of his life. I tucked the key away in my old tackle box, among the rusty hooks and faded lures, and I tried to forget. I raised my own family. I ran the store after he was gone. I lived my life. But sometimes, on quiet evenings, I'd take the key out. It felt heavy, not with weight, but with intention. It was a sealed envelope addressed to someone I couldn't find. The catalyst, as it so often is, was the next generation. My granddaughter, Lily, was 10, a bright, curious thing with eyes that missed nothing. She was helping me clean out the garage, a monumental task I'd put off for a decade, when she found my old tackle box. She wasn't interested in the lures. She zeroed in on that key, separate from the others on my ring. "Papa," she said, holding it up to the light filtering through the dusty window. "This one's pretty. What does it open?" And I heard myself say the words I practiced for 20 years. "Oh, that's nothing, sweetheart. Just an old key." But she saw right through me. Kids always do. She tilted her head. "It looks important. It has a secret." And in that moment, her innocent certainty broke the dam I'd built around my curiosity. She was right. It did have a secret, and I was tired of being its keeper. I decided, then and there, to find the lock. The search began where all things begin at home. My parents' house, my childhood home, now mine, was a time capsule. The attic was a landscape of memory, covered in a fine gray snow of dust. I spent days up there, the air thick with the scent of old paper and cedar. I found my mother's wedding dress, my old baseball mitt, boxes of photographs with curled edges. But no locked boxes that this key would fit. I was about to give up, my back aching from bending over, when I noticed something I'd seen 1,000 times. The floorboards. In the corner, under a stack of Life magazines from the 1960s, one board had a slightly different grain, a hairline crack that seemed too straight to be natural. My heart started to thud a slow, heavy rhythm against my ribs. I pried at the edge with a crowbar. With a groan of protest, the board came up, and there, in the hollow space beneath, lay a small, metal strongbox. It was covered in a rusty film, but it was solid, and on the front, a lock that looked exactly the right size. My hands were trembling as I brushed the dust from the box. This was it, the end of the mystery, or, as it turned out, the very beginning. I fumbled the key from my pocket. It felt warm now, alive. I inserted it into the lock. It slid in smoothly, a perfect fit. I turned it. There was a soft, satisfying click that echoed in the silent attic. I held my breath and lifted the lid. Inside, there was no stack of money, no jewels, nothing of monetary value. There was only a bundle of letters, tied with a faded blue ribbon, and a single, sepia-toned photograph. The photograph showed a young man I recognized instantly as my father, but a version of him I had never seen. He was maybe 20, his face unlined, his eyes bright with a joy I never knew he possessed. His arm was wrapped around a young woman with dark hair and a smile that could light up a room. They were sitting on the running board of an old Ford coupe, leaning into each other as if they were the only two people in the world. And written on the back, in my father's familiar hand, were two words, Arthur and Eleanor. Summer of 44. Eleanor, the name from his dying breath. This was her. This was the ghost. I untied the ribbon with careful fingers, the silk brittle with age. The letters were all addressed to my father, in an elegant, feminine cursive. The postmarks were from 1944, from a city a few hundred miles away. I sat there on the dusty attic floor, the light fading outside the small window, and I began to read. And with each word, the father I thought I knew began to dissolve, and the stranger, a heartbroken, passionate young man, began to take his place. The first letter was full of the frantic energy of wartime. My father, Arthur, was about to ship out. He was a mechanic, not a soldier, but he was being sent to England to support the Air Corps. The letter was filled with plans, with promises. When I get back, we'll get that house on Elm Street. We'll sit on the porch every night. Wait for me, Ellie. Just wait for me. The letters continued, a one-sided conversation tracing their love story. They'd met at a USO dance. He was shy, all thumbs. She was a vision in a red dress, a city girl visiting her cousin in Crestwood. She'd chosen him, of all the boys vying for her attention. Their courtship was a whirlwind of summer picnics, stolen kisses by the lake, and long conversations about a future that seemed limitless. Then he was gone. The letters from her were his lifeline. They were funny and sweet and achingly lonely. She wrote about her job at a factory, building airplanes, about how every plane she touched, she imagined might keep him safe. She wrote about saving money, about the little house on Elm Street. She signed every letter, yours always, Eleanor. I read until my eyes were sore and the attic was dark. This was a love story, a great, sweeping, epic love story. But it wasn't the story that ended with my mother, with me. So what happened? The answer came in the last letter of the bundle. The paper was different, cheaper. The writing was rushed, slanted with distress. It was dated November 1944. My father had been injured. Not seriously, a shrapnel wound in his leg, but he was being sent home. He was ecstatic. He wrote of his transport ship, the date he was due to arrive in New York. I'll take the first train to you, my Ellie. Start looking for that porch swing. But then nothing. There were no more letters from Eleanor. The correspondence just stopped. The ribbon-bound bundle ended with my father's hopeful letter. It was as if Eleanor had simply vanished from the face of the earth. Why hadn't she written again? Had she received his letter? Had she stopped loving him? The mystery had deepened, curdling from a sweet romance into something darker, more unsettling. My father came home to silence. And then, A year later, he married my mother, Clara, a good woman, a practical woman from a neighboring farm. Theirs was a marriage of quiet companionship, of shared duty. It was not the passionate, all-consuming love he had known with Eleanor. I finally understood the shadow in his eyes. He was always waiting for a letter that never came. I had to know what happened to Eleanor. The quest was no longer just about a key. It was about restoring a lost chapter of my father's life, about understanding the source of his lifelong sadness. I felt I owed him that. I owed Eleanor that. Using the return address on the letters, I started my search. The city she had lived in had changed dramatically. The old neighborhoods were gone, replaced by freeways and shopping malls. I spent weeks in libraries, scrolling through microfiche records of old city directories. I looked for an Eleanor with her last name, which was Walsh. I found nothing. It was a dead end. I was ready to admit defeat. The past, it seemed, was determined to keep its secrets. I drove home, the photograph of my father and Eleanor on the passenger seat, her smiling face a constant, haunting reminder of my failure. It was Lily, again, who pointed the way. I was showing her the photograph, telling her a simplified version of the story, about Grandpa Arthur and his friend before the war. She studied the picture with the intense focus of a child. "She's really pretty, Papa," she said. Then she pointed to the car in the background. "That's a cool car. Is that a dog in the window?" I looked closer. It was a detail I'd missed. In the window of a house behind the car, there was indeed the faint shape of a dog, but more importantly, there was a sign. I got a magnifying glass. The sign was small, but legible. "The Willow Inn. Rooms to let." My pulse quickened. The Willow Inn. It wasn't in the city where she mailed the letters. It was here, in Crestwood. She had been living here, in our town, that summer. Why had she lied about her address? Another layer of the mystery unfolded. I went to the Town Historical Society, which was essentially Mildred Peabody, the 90-year-old former librarian, sitting in a room full of filing cabinets. I showed her the photograph. "The Willow Inn," I said. "Do you know where it was?" Mildred adjusted her glasses. "Of course I do, Henry. Burned down in '55. A shame. It was right where the new post office is." My heart sank. But then she tapped the photograph. "Now, that's interesting. Eleanor Walsh. I haven't heard that name in a coon's age." I almost dropped the photo. "You knew her?" Mildred's eyes grew distant. "Knew of her. She caused quite a stir. Came to stay with her cousin for the summer. Pretty thing. Had all the boys buzzing. Especially your father. But then, well, it was all very hush-hush." She leaned forward, her voice dropping to a whisper. "She left in quite a hurry, into that summer. The story was she'd gotten a better job back in the city. But my mother always said she was sent away. Sent away." The phrase hung in the air, heavy with implication. Sent away by whom? And why? Mildred pointed me to the only person who might still know. Old man Henderson, who'd run the newspaper in those days. He was in a nursing home on the edge of town. I went to see him that afternoon. He was frail, his mind drifting in and out of the past. But when I mentioned Eleanor Walsh, his eyes sharpened. "The Walsh girl," he muttered. "Yes, pretty, headstrong. Her family was traditional, very strict. They didn't approve of her seeing a mechanic's son. Your grandfather was a good man, Henry, but he wasn't their kind." He told me a story I'd never heard. Eleanor's family was wealthy, from old money. They had plans for her, a marriage to a suitable boy from their own social circle. When they found out about my father, a small-town boy with grease under his fingernails, they were furious. They'd pulled her out of Crestwood abruptly, cutting off all contact. They'd even intercepted my father's letters, making it seem as if she had simply forgotten him. It was a cruel, calculated act of social engineering. My father had come home to a wall of silence he could never penetrate, believing the love of his life had abandoned him. My heart ached for him. The tragedy was so unnecessary, so petty. But that wasn't the end of the story. It was just the prelude to the real shock. Henderson looked at me, his gaze piercing. "There was a child, you know." The words hit me like a physical blow. The air left my lungs. "A child?" I stammered. He nodded slowly. "That's why they sent her away so fast. To have the baby somewhere no one would know. A home for unwed mothers." She had a little girl, summer of 45, a half-sibling. I had a half-sibling, born a year before me. My father had never known. He'd gone to his grave believing his child with Eleanor had never existed. The world tilted on its axis. The mystery of the key had just exploded into a search for a lost part of my own family. Who was this child? This woman now? Where was she? Did she even know who her father was? The search for my sister became my obsession. I had a name, Eleanor Walsh, and a date, 1945. I hired a genealogist, a patient woman named Maria who was skilled at finding needles in historical haystacks. It took months. Eleanor had, as expected, married well, the suitable boy her family had chosen. She'd had more children. She had lived a full life, it seemed, in a city across the country. She had passed away 10 years ago. The news was a dull thud of disappointment. Another door closed, but Maria kept digging. She found the birth record for the baby girl. Her name was given as Catherine Walsh, but she had been put up for adoption immediately. The trail went cold. The adoption records were sealed, a common practice for that era. It felt like another cruel twist. To be so close, to know she existed, but to have no way to find her. I had a name, Catherine, and nothing else. She was a ghost, just like her mother had been to my father. I was about to give up for good. The emotional roller coaster had taken its toll. I had uncovered my father's great tragedy, only to find a new one, a sister lost to the rigid conventions of a bygone time. I sat at my kitchen table, the strongbox open before me, the photograph of my father and Eleanor staring back. They looked so happy, so full of hope, and it had all been stolen from them, from us. I felt a profound sense of loss, not just for my father, but for the family I never had, the family that should have been. It was then that the phone rang. It was Maria, the genealogist. Her voice was excited. "Henry," she said, "I think I found something. It's a long shot, but when a child was adopted from that particular home, the adoptive parents often attended a specific church. I found a baptismal record from late 1945. A baby girl named Catherine, adopted by a couple named Miller. She gave me the names, John and Grace Miller. It was a common name, but it was a thread, a fragile, gossamer thread, but it was all I had. I started searching for anyone named Catherine Miller born around that time. It was an impossible task. The internet was both a blessing and a curse, offering a million possibilities and no clear answers. I wrote letters, made phone calls, hit dead end after dead end. Months turned into a year. I began to think Catherine, like her mother, was lost to time. Then, one afternoon, I received an email. It was from a woman named Susan. She was responding to a message I'd left on a genealogy forum months earlier. The subject line was simple, Catherine Miller, born 1945. My hand shook as I clicked it open. The email read, "My mother's name was Catherine Miller. She was adopted. She spent her whole life wondering about her birth parents. She passed away 5 years ago, but before she died, she gave me something. She said her birth mother had left it with her, a letter, in case she ever went looking. The name in the letter is Eleanor Walsh. Is this the person you're looking for?" I read the email 3 times, tears blurring the screen. This was it. Susan was my niece, my sister Catherine's daughter. We arranged to meet. She lived only a state away. The drive there was the longest of my life. A lifetime of questions swirled in my head. What was Catherine like? Did she have a good life? Did she ever feel that same sense of something missing that my father had carried? I pulled up to a charming house with a well-tended garden. A woman about my daughter's age stood on the porch, waiting. She had my father's chin. There was no mistaking it. When she saw me, she smiled, and it was Eleanor's smile from the photograph. We hugged, 2 strangers bound by a secret bloodline. She invited me in, and over coffee, she told me about my sister. Catherine had been a teacher. She was kind and creative and had a deep love for family. She'd had a happy life with her adoptive parents, but she always felt a piece of her story was blank. She had tried to find her birth mother, but the walls were too high. She had died without ever knowing about our father, about me. Then, Susan brought out a small, wooden box. Inside was a single, yellowed envelope. "This is the letter her birth mother left," she said. Mom said it was the only thing she had of hers. I took the letter with reverence. The handwriting was the same elegant script from the letters in my attic. It was from Eleanor. It was addressed to my dearest Catherine. It was a letter of heartbreaking love and apology. She explained the impossible situation, the pressure from her family. She wrote of my father, Arthur, describing him as a good, honest man with a heart of gold. She said she loved him with all her soul, and that Catherine was born of that great love. She ended the letter with a plea. If you ever read this, my darling girl, know that you were loved deeply, and if you can, find your father. His name is Arthur Miller. He lives in Crestwood. Tell him I waited. I always waited. She had never stopped loving him. She had been forced to give up their child, forced into a marriage, but she had carried the truth with her. She had died, like my father, with a heart full of what might have been. I showed Susan the strongbox, the photograph, the key. We cried together for the lives not lived, for the family we were only now discovering. It was a bittersweet reunion, filled with both joy for the present and grief for the past. But the story wasn't over. There was one final twist, one that would redefine everything I thought I knew. Susan had something else to show me. When Mom died, she said, I was going through her things. She was a painter, not professionally, but she was very talented. She had a whole portfolio of her work. She led me to a closet and pulled out a large, flat portfolio case. She untied the strings and began to lay the paintings out on the floor. They were beautiful, landscapes mostly, scenes of a quiet, pastoral life. Then she showed me the last one. It was a painting of a porch, a specific porch, a porch with a familiar swing and a majestic maple tree in the front yard, its leaves a blaze of autumn fire. It was my porch, my father's porch, the one he'd sat on every night, staring into the past. I stared at the painting, utterly bewildered. How did she know this place? I whispered. Susan looked at me, her eyes wide with a dawning realization. She painted this about 10 years ago. She said it was a place from a recurring dream she had, a place that felt like home. She said she always felt a deep sense of peace when she dreamed of this porch. A cold shiver ran down my spine. My sister, who had never set foot in Crestwood, who had never known our father, had painted his porch. She had felt its pull across time and distance. It was as if his silent vigil, his lifelong longing, had somehow called out to the daughter he never knew. The love he thought was lost had been echoing through the years, a silent frequency that only she could hear. The key wasn't just a physical object, it was a symbol. It had unlocked a box, which unlocked a story, which unlocked a family. But it had also unlocked a mystery of the heart, a connection that transcended time and circumstance. My father's quiet sorrow had not been in vain. It had been a beacon, and we had finally found our way to each other. I brought Susan and her family to Crestwood. I showed her the hardware store, now run by my son. I showed her the town her grandfather had loved. We stood on that porch, under that same maple tree, now grand and old. I could almost feel my father's presence, and my sisters, their stories finally woven together. The lost heirloom wasn't a thing of gold or silver. It was a story. It was a truth. It was a family, fractured and then, miraculously, made whole again. The secret wasn't a scandal to be hidden. It was a love to be honored. I had spent my life seeing my father as a man defined by a quiet sadness. Now I saw him as a man defined by a love so powerful, it bridged generations. The key had not just opened a strongbox. It had opened my heart to a deeper understanding of legacy, of love, and of the invisible threads that bind us all together. Some stories aren't meant to stay in the attic. They're meant to be brought into the light, so they can finally rest. So you see, that dusty box in the attic, it didn't just hold old letters. It held a second chance. It held a sister I never knew, a niece who now feels like a daughter, and a new chapter for our family. It taught me that the greatest heirlooms we inherit aren't things, but the truths we have the courage to seek. If you've held on to a mystery in your own life, perhaps my story will give you the nudge to go looking. You never know what piece you might find. And if this story of love and legacy resonated with you, If it reminded you of your own family secrets, then perhaps you'd like to join us for more tales like this. Your subscription helps us keep these memories alive. Thank you for listening. Truly, some doors are closed for a reason, but others, well, others are just waiting for the right key.